My name is Dylan Almendrol. Today is August 8th, 2017. We are in the Santa Ana Public Library. We are here with, please state your name.
Margrit Kendrick.
And
Actually, it's Margareta Verena Kendrick. It's a long name, but so I abbreviated it a long time ago. I am from Switzerland, in 1929. From the north, actually the northern part under a Rhine River. The Rhine River provides the boundary between Germany and Switzerland, and consequently that is the northern part. And then it goes up on the western part and provides the boundary between Germany and Luxembourg and Holland, Belgium, Holland, and goes into the Atlantic. In 1929, it was still relatively easy. We did not notice in Switzerland the terrible inflation Germany had at that point. And later on, of course, there was a complete change of government in Germany. And since we lived at the border, right at the border between, just south of the Rhine River, between Germany and Switzerland, we noticed the changes appearing in 1938. Up to then, we already heard the whisper of what is happening everywhere else. News became quite, what shall I say, well, they became cleaned up. Cleaned up, I mean, they became very much, well, they became conscious of what you say and what you don't say and what you just imply. And since we lived at the border, I've noticed at that point I could cross the border any old time before the middle of '38 without any passport, because everybody knew me. And I crossed that border multiple times because my grandmother lived on the German side. The area where I'm from was until 1802 part of the Habsburg Empire. It was called Vorderösterreich. And so in 1802, Napoleon just simply declared borders and put that part where I'm from into Switzerland. And so we always spoke almost the same dialect on the south side of the Rhine as on the north side of the Rhine. People moved freely, even so it was past 1802, they moved freely across. And then in 1838, I all of a sudden needed to have a border pass. That means a card with my picture on it and all the information and all that, and I could no longer cross. And the people who stood at the border on the German side were no longer the people I knew and spoke the same dialect. They came from northern Germany, and they spoke essentially a different German. Not that I had problems with it, because we in Switzerland do not read or write our dialect. We read and write German. As you know, as when you learn German in school, or if you learn at all the languages, it's slightly different. I speak 5, which are, of course, German and Swiss German, and English and French and Italian. Switzerland itself is a four-language country, and the fourth language is an ancient Romansh, part because the Romans invaded us too 2,000 years ago. So it's the and some of that dialect of the Romans preserved itself as a dialect in Switzerland, in Austria, where it's called Friuli. We call it Romansh, and it is at the northern end of Italy, bordering on the Tyrol and onto Switzerland. We already heard that in Germany, the ancient Bundeskanzler, whose name was Hindenburg. He was a general in the First World War. And he was, for some reason, he stepped back and let Hitler from a national, what was that party? I'll call it Nazi, but it has a different name. The Nationale Sozialistische Partei, the National Socialist Party, and he became chancellor. And slowly but surely, things changed. There was a hatred against Jews, and so in 37 and 38, my mother, who was pretty much courageous and drove the car better than my father did. My father had a problem backing up. So my mother rescued several Jewish families from Germany and Austria, across the borders into Switzerland, and from there one man went on to Brazil, to Sao Paulo, and he came back in 1956, so I no longer saw him, I was already here. One family was a three-part family, two sons and a mother, and their families. She crossed over from Austria, and they went to Australia. And the third family was a real family, Fred, and she had the permission to even settle him in Switzerland. And we had an apartment for him and everything. And then he was worried that his furniture couldn't come over, but she had already organized too. And he went across the border again, and surely he was arrested. His wife was Protestant, and so they didn't arrest her. It was strange. It was just plain strange for a young person like me, that people which we knew and we liked, and as children which we really cared about, that they would be arrested for no earthly reason because they had a different faith. And people became, and since we had a store at the border and only German customers, that started to dwindle somewhat too, because in Switzerland there was a different custom duty on coffee, tea, chocolates, and cigarettes, cigars, things. In Germany they had a much higher tax on it, so the people could come across and buy, mind you, the amount 50 grams of coffee. 50 grams are a little less than 2 ounces. And I think it was only 25 grams of tea. Now, that's a little less than an ounce. If you ever adopt the metric system, you're in much better shape. I always have to put in my own style. And so, and cigars and cigarettes and all that, and chocolates were 100 gram of chocolate, and the Swiss were known for very good chocolate. And so we sold that, and always had a lot of customers who walked across a 200-year-old covered bridge, the last remaining bridge over the Rhine River in all of Europe, out of wood and covered. It still stands, and I just went across it again, I mean, in last September. And so it just, and then we also had a store on a German side, a small department store, and that was on the German side, a few towns downstreams between my village and the city of Basel, but on the German side. One morning, the brown shirts, that's the SR, whatever that was called, Sturm, no, the SS is the Sturmstandard. The SR was the something else.
You were saying SA.
SA, SA, correct. Yeah, at times you have to bear up with me. I still use, especially when I regress to an earlier age, that I use more German pronunciation. It's just part of me. So they stood by our store on the German side, and they declared, they took the names of all the people who came in. After 2 days, no one came in. So we had to close that store. Before that, my father had received a letter from the German government asking him to become a German citizen, since he had a store on the German side, and to also fire the manager of the store, which was the former owner, a Jewish lady. My father said no. So we took the Jewish lady across the border because we had a way of going south, going actually east, driving east, and then across that wooden bridge to our house. And it was easier because there we've always went across, so it wasn't quite as, and we took her across, and she lived in our house. And it was her son, which my mother later, and his family, which my mother later wanted to rescue, and who went back. And the store was closed, and my parents wanted to have a permission to bring the merchandise across, because we had 3 other stores where we easily could have sold the items, no permit. Exactly, just really closed out. I mean, we were getting pretty darn poor, because in '39, on September 1st, Switzerland and the town crier came and called it out, had general mobilization. All soldiers were asked to report within 48 hours to the place they were supposed to go. And that was still done by a town crier. That was a way, you know, you don't know some of those things, which I as a child experienced, and thinking back, it was something, you know, one didn't know. The borders were closed. There was no longer any German customers, so that store of ours closed too, and that was the primary moneymaker, really. And it cost us also our house, since it was directly on the Rhine River, had to have the dynamite to blow up that ancient bridge in our basements. We had, our house was right in the front was the Rhine River, and in the back was a little hill. So we had a lot of basements, and in the basement was the dynamite. So we no longer wanted to live there either, because no one could have warned us to move out once that dynamite if Hitler had to cross the border. And that was especially eminent in May of 1940, when Hitler actually at that point already had Austria since 1938, and he now had he was fighting against France. So then he had an access to Italy on two sides, crossing the Alps toward Italy, because he and Mussolini were friends. And then we moved to the capital city of our home canton, where my mother was the manager of a store, and my father was in the military service, but at least we were safe and all that, and so life went on. And my grandmother still lived on the German side, because my grandfather had a construction business there, and he had died already several years prior to that. But my father had two brothers who conducted the construction business. And then we could no longer see our grandmother, of course. There was no way we could go across. There was no way to cross the border. All along our land, along the Rhine River on the south side, there was barbed wire fencing, so no one could even swim across unless they knew where there was maybe already a little breach or something. Soldiers were quartered in our house, and then, and war started in Europe in 1939, and it didn't end here until August of 1945, when Japan was. So it was a little earlier finished in Europe in May of 1945. It was a little later here in August of 1945. That one was an amazing thing. When hostilities ended, when we all knew that Germany had finally given up, people were dancing in the streets. There was such a joy. I remember it. I then was 16, and I had never seen. The Swiss are a very staunch person. Swiss are a staunch person, especially the German-speaking Swiss. The French-speaking and the Italian-speaking are a little different. And I remember it. We were dancing in the streets. There was such a joy. There was such a loosening of, as if we'd gone to heaven. At least that's sort of what you could, that you finally made it to the pearly gates, and it was something so different, hard to describe. I would think it was similar in this country, because a war is such a terrible experience. Every day you hear on the radio, that was the only, how the Germans sunk the ship. The ship got always a lot bigger than it was at the beginning, It has a lot of tonnage. They described it by the tonnage, and they described, and you probably was a canoe, but it got to be a huge ship. And you couldn't go by what the German command reported. And the German command, of course, was Goebbels, It was and we tried to listen to the BBC, and that was another story. the Allied as well as the Germans had a way of making things bigger. If you sit in a little country and you're totally surrounded by war, you can't but have fear. We couldn't go anywhere, we couldn't do anything. It was just hard. Oh ja.
Would you be willing to recite that?
Okay. Unser Vater, der du bist, werf den Hitler auf den Mist. Goebbels, Göring auch dazu, dann haben wir alle wieder Ruhe. Und in Swiss German it was, our Father, der du bist. Kei de Hitler auf den Mist. Goebbels, Göring auch dazu, dann haben wir alle wieder Ruhe. Und it means sort of like, our Lord, without R, oh God, what an old English, throw Hitler on the dung. Goebbels, Göring also too, then have we all a peace again. You know, sort of like, it's a translate, hard to translate, but this was something we, we felt like we were going to do for the war effort. Because also we knitted gloves, we knitted blankets, all the things. Food was rationed. And there was quite a lot of rationing on it, and it was rationed actually until 1947 partially. Our parks were all turned over and we grew potatoes because our wheat really had to come from Canada. And they did give us an open harbor in Italy called Leghorn, south of Geneva. And that's where the Canadian ships could load. America was out. Whereas the Americans had Alan Dulles in Bern, and he conferred quite a bit. I later on read quite some history. He conferred quite a bit with spies from the Germans. You know, it was the transportation of spies and counter spies and sort of like Maxwell Smart. And but life was not easy. Especially since my mother had to work, and we children were sort of left by ourselves. And since I was the middle one, and my brother was actually, he studied in a Benedictine school in the interior of the country. So I was the oldest, and I had to take care of two younger ones. I went to a business school, and until I was 20, I stayed home. And then I took an apprenticeship with the Swiss government. And then I worked for 6 years for the Swiss government, and I really enjoyed that. And eventually I got transferred to the capital city, Bern. And because my languages helped me a lot. And I worked in a university quarters of Bern, and that's where I met, at the university, I met my husband. I took some evening classes there. I worked during the day, and I took some evening classes because I just finally enjoyed to be able to do a little something for my education. And that's where I met my husband, who was a GI student. He studied on his GI. He's an American. He had been in the Pacific Theater. He fought in Iwo Jima. He was a Marine. And then they paid him 4 years of study. And here in America, he would have had to wait a year. And so he went first went to Europe. And he tried the Sorbonne, but the French wasn't something he could, he had absolutely no idea how to learn French. So he went to Germany, and he went to Heidelberg, and he ran in a bunch, because he had an ancient, his mother's cousin lived there. His mother and his grandmother and grandfather had come from Germany on his mother's side. On his father's family came from Ireland, but the family really originated in England. The Kendrick is an English name and came up already in the Doomsday Book as Cendric. And and then they must have put them into Ireland under Cromwell, you know. In order to know history, the Irish history is a sad one. And you need to know the total European history to understand some of the things which went on there. Not all of them good. And so his family, his father's family immigrated from Ireland to Illinois in 1866. And his grandparents on the German side came into North Dakota from all the godforsaken places to go to, came to North Dakota in 1886. So it shows you the immigration of people from Europe to...
What was your husband's name?
Earl W. Kendrick. We were married first in a civil ceremony in Switzerland on August the 3rd, 1955. Then we went across the border to Germany in the church I was baptized in. But in Europe, in order to marry, you first have to have a civil ceremony. I think it goes back to Napoleon or someone. And before the church can marry you. Here, this is different. I think you can marry either civil or church, but I had to have two. So I had two. And they were in different countries. So it shows you how different habits and cultures are. And then I had to wait until I had my permit to come to this country. So after we had this certificate of marriage, I went I sent in my papers to Bern. Then to the American consulate. Then I had to have, I had to show that I had 20,000 francs. Actually, I only had 20,000 francs, but they said $20,000. Well, you know, so the one on the other one was only worth a fourth of the dollar at that point. And I had to be of good health, so I needed to have a doctor's certificate. I had to have a certificate from the police that I was an upstanding person. And I got I got that permit relatively early. Within less than 2 months. But at that point, the immigration into this country was a little different. Each country had a quota. And you had, there just were no illegals then. It just wasn't, it was different. I don't know why they have such a problem now. It's because they no longer watch the till. or I mean, they just didn't watch anymore what was going on. We came to San Francisco because my husband had to make, well, first we stopped in North Dakota. No, first we stopped in New York. And that was sort of interesting because on the ship, like, I thought I couldn't fly across. I needed 2 or 3 or 4 days on the ship to acclimatize myself to a different country. So we didn't fly, even though that existed already in '55. We came on the SS United States. And that was a very fast ship. It had won the blue ribbon. So I got on the ship and I was okay. And the first thing I ordered that first evening was a lettuce. And the waiter looked at me. Lettuce. My husband translated. She means a salad. But I had learned English to pronounce it differently. I still said vegetables, a little more, and lettuce. So I had to learn American English. I had to translate it into American English. So we got to New York, and the health officer comes aboard ship, and he looks at everybody. And I was a little afraid because I was seasick. The whole rest of after the Irish Sea came the open ocean, and I was seasick. So not much of that acclimatizing to ready to return. And we got to New York in the harbor. And all I heard on that harbor was German and Yiddish. And I understood Yiddish. And I said, "Are you sure we're on the right continent?" And then a friend picked us up and we stayed for a few days on Long Island. The next day I had to go into New York to Macy's because my feet were so swollen because I couldn't drink or eat on a boat, and so I just had to buy a pair of big shoes, Volga boots. And you never hear some of the words I'm using, because for big shoes we call them Volga boots, or Volga boats.
Why?
Volga, something from the Russians, you know.
Oh, like the Volga River.
Like the Volga River, right. And those were big shoes. They were big moccasins, but I made it then by train. Eventually we went to North Dakota. My husband's father was a railroad station agent in New Rockford, North Dakota. And so we took the train from the big station, the central station in New York, to Chicago. And then we had to take a taxi to a different station. And the taxi driver said, "You gotta be careful in Chicago. They steal your purse." Guess what? I kept all our worldly goods in my purse. And I thought, "Ye gods, what kind of country is this?" And then we rode on the train from Chicago to North Dakota because we had to take the Great Northern. That's where my husband's father was a railroad station agent. And so we finally got to North Dakota. God forbid. Well, I told my husband right away after I saw that small town, that's not a town I want to live in. And I was happy that he had his internship in San Francisco. We already had that arranged. It was sort of strange. It was in the middle out of nowhere. And this was a huge country. You know, you come through, after Chicago, you come through a countryside which actually is ugly. And that's putting it mildly. It's not the West. The West is beautiful. But there were some clapboard houses. the land was brown. It was end of October. So I didn't see any real beauty in it. Maybe if I go back and look at it again, there is some, but I didn't see it. We got to my in-laws' house, and the first thing is his cousin came to visit, but she came on a horse, and she rode right into the living room. Oh, I said, this must be the Wild West. I mean, I couldn't believe it. Here I come from a central country in Europe, very cultural, well, some culture, but this is a different culture, an entirely different culture. And then we were invited by someone else, by a farmer and his wife. And his wife originally had come from Austria, and her father had been a coachman with the Kaiser. So, and she showed me, you know, what they still had from there. But in comes this big pig. I don't know, I don't remember if it had a name or not. It wasn't Arnold. It was just a pig, and it sat on a couch. And you can't believe what, it was amazing. It was really amazing. But then I said, yeah, you know what, my father asked me to go look at Indians. And since this is the Sioux territory, I like to see Indians, to my father-in-law, because he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I like to see Indians. And my father had pronounced the Sioux as Sioux, the way it's written. And so he took me to Fort Totten, Totten, not far from there, because, and so I wanted to see the Indians. Of course, I expected they would all sit around with full regalia. There were a couple of old men in khaki pants and khaki shirts, and a khaki ball cap on. And those are the Indians, my father-in-law said. I mean, I went from one thing to the other. I couldn't believe it. My North Dakota experience was fabulous. Then my husband, who liked to hunt before he got to Europe and got cultured, took a gun. He had also sent an old military gun to his father, and his father had already sold it, and he was mad at that. But he took another gun, and he went out geese hunting. And in 3 shots, he had a whole bunch of geese. And then I had to understand that those are buckshots, you know, I didn't know about that. Hunting and fishing was just for the rich people in Europe. And here, you know, everybody went out and went hunting and fishing. And then my mother-in-law thought she would really serve me deer meat, bear meat. Was it bear? Yeah, there was bear. And elk and geese, and I hated that stuff. I said, could I just have a piece of toast? I hated wild meat. I had some deer meat in Europe, but you go through all kinds of processes until you can eat that stuff, you know, because I don't like wild meat. Here they seem to live with it. Well, then we took off again to San Francisco, and it was a different feeling. We went through we stopped over in Tacoma where he had some relative living, and we stopped over just for a night. And then next morning took the daylight special or whatever that one is down to San Francisco. And we got to San Francisco, and the ride along the coast is beautiful. You know, now I saw some beautiful country, and so we got in Oakland, and we took the ferry to San Francisco. And my husband's brother, his older brother, 12 years older or whatever, waited for us. And he had lunch waiting at the, now I forgot the name, one of the oldest hotels in San Francisco. It had survived the earthquake, and Enrico Caruso stayed there once, so that impressed me. And then they gave me some good advice what to look for jobs. And I know we needed jobs. For one night we could afford staying in a hotel, but then we needed to find an apartment. And my husband found that not too far away from St. Mary's, where he did his internship. And so we got settled there. Yeah, that first apartment was $60 a month. And it was what you call a studio apartment with a Murphy bed, which turned around and was behind the wall. I hadn't seen that before, but I thought that was pretty good. And $60 was affordable because my husband only made $60 as an intern. So I knew I needed a job pronto, immediately. And so after about 3 days, no, it was about the middle of the month. So, and we got into San Francisco the 1st of November. And my husband went to St. Mary's, and I walked around San Francisco, and he started almost the next day, and then so I knew I had to get a job. So I walked around, and the first thing I did was go into Bank of America, because I had a lot of experience in banking from my Swiss job, and I had a lot of experience. I had languages. So I went in there, and they hired me. And I didn't even have any proof of all of that, but I could give them, because I had written to Switzerland to give me a reference or something, or also what you call a report card of my 6 years. And I got that about a month later, but meanwhile the bank had also wired them, and they got theirs by wire. So they knew that I was an upstanding person, and all the things I said were true. And they hired me, and I worked in the international department in traveler's checks. But the checks, I had some French checks, some French translations, and a few German and Italian. But the primary checks, the primary claims for checks, traveler's checks, came from Japanese. And so I said, what gives? How come we have those outstanding traveler's checks from 1942 to 1944 to my boss? And he said, well, don't you know, we had all the Japanese put into, what you call it?
Prison camps.
Well, yeah, they were prison camps. They called it something different.
Internment camps.
Internment camps. And I said, I did not know. I was absolutely upset. And I went and I called my husband and I said, did you know? And how come you didn't tell me? Well, I couldn't understand. Later on, as I read more history, they actually had done similar things in Europe too, especially in India. India had Germans in internments and other, so it wasn't really so isolated, but nevertheless, there it was. So I worked at the Bank of America, and I got 3 raises in 1 year, and I thought, gee, this is fabulous, But then my husband said, well, then our first child was born, and they asked me at Bank of America, what you going to do about your family? Oh, I said, my family is in Switzerland. Oh, he said, no. I said, I'm sorry. I just forgot I got, I'm part of my own family now. And, it was a good job, and it was interesting. And later we got transferred to the Travelers Checks branch international was actually located at 1 Powell Street in the day and night branch. Later on, we got transferred to the financial district. So the bank grew, and the bank now is huge. Yes. And I wrote home, it's the biggest bank in California, to Switzerland. Now, I mean, San Francisco to me was a revelation. I had never seen people especially after the isolation of World War II, people of different cultures and different cultures, different skin, different everything. I had never seen Orientals. Chinatown was to me like the best thing ever happened. I mean, I was like a child going into Disneyland. Chinatown was fabulous. I saw all this junk, which I played with as a child in the stores here. All this. They hadn't seen many black people, because the only black people I saw in Bern were associated with all the ambassadors and all that, with all the country ambassadorships. I had never seen Mexican. I saw some people which I knew must have been mayors. San Francisco then was like United Nations all in one place. And it was something which you have to experience when you come from a total one society and one culture country. Even so, I knew the European cultures, but they're slightly related. Here they were very different. And whenever I became homesick, I went down to the harbor and I listened to the Italian fishermen. There were some fishermen there from Genoa, and Genoa has an Italian which I understood. If you go further south, they speak a dialect. So I enjoyed that. But you cannot believe what it means when you have never seen so many people from different parts of the world, of the globe, as I saw then. It was a fantastic experience. And I watched them and I saw what they were doing, and they were doing the same I did, So it was truly a melting pot. Now I hear that San Francisco is no longer enjoyable. They have too many homeless. They had some there, but it wasn't huge. It wasn't, it was a little bit, and you sort of accepted that as something. Now I hear anyone who comes over from my own country and they go to San Francisco, they come back down here and they say, oh no, I don't like it. In San Francisco we were a year and a half. And then we moved to Los Alisal by Salinas because my husband took a residency at the Monterey County Hospital, a general practitioner, family doctor. And, but you still took a residency to be with it, you know. And then after a year there, and that one is John Steinbeck country. And that was very interesting. I read all those books. And by then I could go to the library. Well, when my husband was there with a car, because without a car you couldn't go tiddly. You couldn't leave your house. You couldn't even go shopping. Nada. It was all too far. And that shows you the need for public transportation or something. Anyway, they did something. My neighbor went cleaning after they got Salinas is the salad or the lettuce capital of California. And my neighbor went cleaning in the fields. And so she took me with her, and I had never known about cleaning except from the Bible. You know, you go into the fields and you could go afterwards, and that was very interesting. I thought, and she had a whole shed in her backyard full of stuff, lettuce and peppers and you name it, she had it. And so I helped cleaning, and the baby was somewhere, you know, there. And found that very interesting. I also did not know about all the guest workers we had. And I found that very, very sad, the way they were treated. There was not any proper housing for them. There wasn't any, and that is a big agricultural area around Salinas. The carrots and the tomatoes and there's lettuce and all that. And, you know, there were always on Saturday nights problems at the hospital. And my husband came home and said, well, we had to do this and this and this because they had knife fights and all that. It was, to me, I thought that is, we also had guest workers in Switzerland. They came from Italy because the Italians usually had no jobs and Italy was not yet that up. It still isn't really. The south is still, Sicily, for instance, is an agricultural part of Italy, and it's not up. And they always went north for jobs. And so I knew about it, but I did not see how sadly they were treated. And I don't think that even 60 years later we have solved that problem very satisfactorily. Anyway, that's my own thought about it. After Salinas, my husband said, then he needed to look for jobs on, and we went down to San Luis Obispo, but we did not live there. We just went to visit and look. And then he said, I think I go to Southern California. First of all, he had two brothers living here. one in LA and one in West Covina. And so we settled in Whittier, and my husband found a job with a hospital in Norwalk. The hospital no longer exists, and he later switched over to LA County as a public health physician. And after 1 year in Whittier, we knew we had to move because the 605 was going to take all the houses on Bexley Drive in Whittier. And so my husband worked nights some nights at the emergency hospital for LA County, Harbor Hospital. And he came home one night and he said, came home one day and he said, we're going to look at houses in Rossmore. Oh, I said, where is that? Oh, he said, I don't know. You go on Norwalk Boulevard, then you turn into San Antonio, and then you turn into, that Norwalk Boulevard went on, and it changed its names as it went on. Also, we did one Sunday, and we saw this new community, and we being built. And we looked at home prices and looked at model homes. And I'd like to have one particular model home. Later on, I was glad we didn't get that. And then he said, well, we picked one. It wasn't built yet, mind you. And but it was close to the school where I knew that by then I had 2 kids that they would go eventually, and it was close to church. Well, at that point I was still going to church most times, and the church wasn't built either. So it was all somewhere in the future, and. So then my husband said, I got to find out first if I can live in another county, because that was Orange County. And so he did, and they gave him permission. And so we paid, and the house was $21,300. And the monthly payments were $114.44. And I thought, can you think we can afford that? And I think the sales guy sort of looked at me and thought, she must be loco. There is obviously a formula that you could pay 25% at that point in 60 years ago, a formula that if you could afford 25% you can, of your income per month there. That did not yet include taxes. And so we bought the house, and we could move in. On my 30th birthday, I got the keys, and we could move in a week later. And that was a new community, and to me, that was very interesting. It did have the schools, it had the prognosis of. It had a church, but that only sat 200 people and had no parking, and was a little too far to walk. So, but a new church was being built. And the community was starting, and to me, who was born in a community which is 700 years old, across the Rhine River, a city which is 1,000 years old, a new community was interesting for me, and I was not yet a citizen, so I thought, well, I waited a little longer, and I became a citizen. And, meanwhile, my kids had gone to school, and I needed to learn about education in this country. So I really got involved in that. And pretty soon after I became a citizen, I decided to run for school board. And then I thought, but it was something new. It was something you got to do when you're new in a community. You got to put your 5 cents in. And I won. I said, oh my God, what do I do now? The first woman on that school board, And that was easy. I already knew enough about it. And I enjoyed it. I stayed on for 14 years, and we even helped form a unified school district. But then later on, we are still a county unincorporated territory. And I got involved in everything that community could do. If there was a thing from the county, I sat on it. Pretty soon my name was, known, and they used it. And whenever there was a vote on something, I had a plaque outside my house how I was going to vote. And I had about 50 friends who said, we drive by your house and see how you vote. That way we'll know how to vote. I did that for many years. I no longer do it. I just don't want to do it because I think it's different. Actually, not too long. I sell books every other month on the outside. I was on the board and I was president, so I would say I was involved with the Friends of the Library for about 10 years. But I'm still involved, now I'm longer. By now it's about 12 years. And I still sell books every other month because I enjoy that. And I think it's fun. Then those people buy all those books I want to read, They just got there to the shelves before I did. And I'm still involved with the museum. I've been involved with that for a long time. And I was on the board for 30 years. But then finally I got off when I said, I am getting too old. There need to be younger people. But I'm still a docent because I wrote the history. And so, eventually in 1984, the city, one of the city people from Los Alamitos said, you know what, we have no history, no written history. And I said, you must be kidding. And then someone volunteered me to write the history, and the Historical Commission published that. And I thought, and then later I got onto the Historical Commission for the county, and I'm on there now for 25 years. God forbid, when you get old, you've been on for a long time. And that I really enjoy, because there are so many new things we can do in this county. There was someone who came to our meeting about 2 or 3 months ago and said, we need a natural history museum in the Great Park. And I'm all for doing something in a Great Park of value, because we from the other end will otherwise never visit that Great Park. It will become a pure Irvine Park. And since the Historic Commission has the paleontology of this county and the archaeology of this county, she wanted the natural history with the paleontology, and we're rich. This county is very rich. It is something of great value, where people from the world come to our Cooper Center to see what we're doing. And to have that in a museum is very important. So next month we're going to go on a long-range goal and objectives this is my multi-year goal, that we help as much as we can on it, on getting a museum. And because I find that so important, and also a cultural part for our Indians of this county, because we don't have that either. They're both just tribes, the Ahachimans as well as the Tongvas. And the Tongvas are, of course, both counties, LA and thing. But you don't realize how much value and how much immensity we have in our paleontology, that, you know, it's something to, every time I look at it, I think that is fabulous. It is just, and the last director we had did a fabulous job there. And I'm still doing all the things I like to do. Try to do a little less, but you know. "20 years from now," and of course you have now a board of supervisors which has a lot of Asian in it. And I hope they progress. You know, I haven't yet really immersed myself that much in that difference of culture that could bring in, but I still see a progression of things if they keep up the thought. Bauer's Museum has a lot of Asian influence now, and that was supposed to be a county museum. It has a lot of Asian influence, so we are probably becoming a much more Pacific area, and I mean the greater area of the Pacific area involved county. The South County has developed very, very nicely. You see Mission Viejo, you see, where was I the other day? The one who has the Monarch Bay in Aliso. I mean, it's fabulous. And then I worry about the water, because we have a different plumbing in Orange County. Well, I think we have a different plumbing all over California. And, but we are moving forward. When you think that Rosmer was the first big development in Orange County, starting in the mid-1950s, and even so it was at that border, later on the county was extremely rural then. So it's 60 years from a rural country to just look at Irvine and all the big companies who are there. So I think if we can get the big companies involved in that museum, we would have a name. We would have a bigger name. We wouldn't just be OC. We would be Orange County. I haven't thought about the use for a while. I was down at UC Irvine last year, and I think we have a beautiful county, number one. Keep it that way, but also step forward and do as many things. I mean, what has happened to me in the years since I'm born, I can't keep up with all those developments. I do fine with the computer. I'm not doing too fine with my cell phone. I've got a little problem there, you know, and it has to do that the cell phones now are little computers too, and I gotta get used to that. And so they actually are fortunate to be born here. There are enough colleges here to get a good education. Most school districts, or all school districts in this county are good. Can't say the same about LA City. That is too big for its breeches and should, you know, that can never be anything unless they split it up and do something different. It's too big. But they have the fortune of having a beautiful county. What we need is more public transportation, and what we need, those are minor things. If they think of it as a necessity. They have never thought of it as a necessity, so they need to rethink that public transportation is necessary because our freeways are getting too, just go in a 4 or 5 at peak traffic. I went down to Irvine a week ago and it took me an hour and a half to do 20 miles. That's ridiculous. Of course, there were two accidents on it. But things like this are hard to do. I'm not sure we have enough housing for lower income or for middle income even now. So we need to do more there. I wonder where. And the youth has actually do they? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we have done enough for the youth. Have we? How do you feel? You know,
if there's a question that we as a community, past and present, have not done enough for the youth, if there's any question, then in my opinion, we have not done enough.
Yeah, and I come to that conclusion too. After you put me down, you know, I always thought I had done enough, but you know, now I think no, we have not. We have not provided a lot of things which we haven't, yeah. And that's funny that I should do at that many years into that we should consider that.
But the job is never complete.
No, that's true. The job is never complete. And, but we need to keep that in mind, that it is not complete. And we can't rest on our laurels either. And that is part of the problem. We need to do more, and I always thought that, come to think of, for kids who do not want to go on to college, that they have enough education and the proper education to enter the job market, and we are not doing that. We keep them in high school, and they're pretty darn sick after age 16. The ones who are not going, you know, and that one I always considered we're missing something there. We're missing that trade in to jobs, that training to jobs which does not require college. And there are lots of kids like that. And it's not that they're just as intelligent. Every child has a gift. They're just as intelligent, but they need that training, and we don't provide that. So, here we go. Finally got it again. I always thought so. I thought so when we kept them in school until 18, and they're pretty damn sick of after 16. They like to get out. Two sons and a daughter. Yeah, the first one was what you call gifted. The second one was a girl, and the third one learned differently. And there was the problem I never solved with him. He did go on to to community college, but did not finish. Wanted a different lifestyle, more an outdoor lifestyle, and so I didn't ever feel I had done enough there. And my husband didn't chime in at all with the kids. And the daughter got her full, she's an attorney, she got her full education. Why it was harder for the youngest one to do, you know, it's just different. He wanted to be a surfer, and he wanted to be a skier, but you need to have a little more than that. First of all, I like us to do the multi-year thing on the thing. Secondly, I'm also doing the plaques. That means we put plaques on buildings or things which have a history behind it, like an old adobe or, well, you could name the mission, you know, things like this, which teach people history, which teach them what happened here at one time. Like I put, for instance, a plaque in Los Alamitos where the sugar beet industry started. Orange County had, Los Alamitos was the first sugar beet factory in Orange County. And it later devolved into 5 more, or into 5. Yeah. Anaheim, Huntington Beach, and all that. But it was an industry, the first agriculture industry. And so I like that. Of course, being Swiss, I also take care of the trust fund. And that is just simply my reaching all the way back to banking and but I like to see us progress in really trying to teach people as they walk by, teaching them about history. Just we applied a plaque at in Yorba Park for the Santa Ana River, because that is a very old river, and provided the city of Anaheim with their grapes industry, which they had originally, it reaches back to what was, and it teaches people as they just walk by. It only takes a second or 2 seconds, 3 seconds to read that. And so I like to see that, because history has always been something I loved. In Europe, I did the administration of the Romans in their many colonias. And some of them they did really wrong. That's why they finally fell apart. Anyway, I like to see the county progress, and you know, you look at things, and we actually have a lot of things here which are worthwhile seeing. Like, for instance, Irvine Park. That's a fun park when you're young, and has a lot of things there. When you're older, it gets a little harder and a little far away. But there are many communities in between. I also liked us to do something about traffic. We need that. And, well, it needs to be younger people now who need to take over. But in order for them to do it, we need to teach them. We need to teach them the civic civic pride and civic obligation. And I feel that we are laying a little low in a democracy with the obligation toward a democracy. I come from a much older democracy, but I always felt obligated. I still feel obligated when our national day comes around, which was on August 1st. Like I feel here on the 4th of July, an obligation toward the country, toward democracy.
Thank you, Margrit.
You're welcome. Did you get what I'm all about?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just, you know, I,
Thank you for holding the torch for a very, very long time.
well,
You are appreciated.
I didn't hold the torch. It's just, this is interesting. There is an interesting country, and it is truly a melting pot, because you see those people come, like I watched the people from Vietnam, and they do melt in, and that is actually, you know, I see the people from other countries, they all contribute to it. I see the people, different skin tones, different faces, and they all contribute to something, to a great sort. But we have a little problem. Oh, thank you for the water.
Let me get your glasses for you.
Got it.
There you go. Okay.
Did you get enough out of it? My God.
Okay. We're good to end?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Did you understand what I meant?